There's a quote that I came across recently from Jordan Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos, which I realized is actually attributed to another guy named Hanlon. The name of this theory, so to speak, is called Hanlon's razor, and it goes, never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. A.G. Wells is a very well-known author. He's known for some classics such as War of the Worlds, but he had a variation of this quote where it goes, there is very little deliberate wickedness in the world. The stupidity of our selfishness gives much of the same results indeed, but in the ethical laboratory it shows a different nature. What he means by this, with the ethical laboratory showing a different nature, is that difference in intent. If someone is intentionally doing something malicious versus someone who is doing it out of ignorance, there is an ethical difference there, but the results might end up being the same, at least as far as the one who is on the receiving end of that, right? The same amount of pain and hurt would be equal because they might easily be assuming, as we often do, that it is coming from a place of malice. But what this quote or this theory, this Hanlon's razor theory, points out is that we should give people the benefit of the doubt. We should assume that the reason why they're doing what they're doing is more out of ignorance than it is a conscious intent to hurt us. And I think we can really push this to the limits because even people who might be doing things so apparently intentionally are only doing it because they are not aware. They did not grow up with the tools that equips them to be better able to communicate their feelings better, or they did not grow up in an environment that fostered the types of coping skills that would make them the types of person who we would be comfortable to be around. So even in those cases, we could put that in the bin of ignorance and naivety, even when it seems pretty obvious that it's coming from a place of malice. The whole point of these quotes is really to just give other people the benefit of the doubt. What this does, I've noticed, is that it really takes away that sting of reactivity that pushes us, that gives us that impetus to want revenge or to want to see that person suffer the consequences of what they did. It also reduces judgmentalism on the other hand.
That's a profound insight. By adopting Hanlon's razor, we essentially choose to see the world through a lens of empathy and understanding, rather than one of judgment and retaliation. It's fascinating how shifting our perspective from assuming malice to recognizing ignorance can change our emotional responses. This shift can reduce our desire for revenge and help us manage our judgments more constructively. Think about it. If we approached every negative interaction with the assumption that the other person simply lacks the tools or knowledge to act differently, it opens up a pathway for compassion. This doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but reframes it in a way that prioritizes growth and learning over punishment and retribution. It's about recognizing that people often act out of the limitations of their experiences and understanding. However, pushing this to the limits, as you suggest, can be challenging. It's easy to slip back into reactive patterns, especially when the hurt feels personal. The real test of this approach is maintaining it consistently, even when faced with behaviors that seem undeniably malicious. It requires a level of patience and emotional maturity that not everyone may have developed yet. But imagine the collective impact if more people adopted this mindset. It could lead to a more compassionate society where we focus on healing and understanding rather than perpetuating cycles of hurt. In your experience, have you found any practical ways to remind yourself of this principle in the heat of the moment?
I think just taking that extra second to pause and realize that whatever it is that other people are doing could be coming from 1,000 different sources, and to use that as a reason to not be so quick to react. I think oftentimes it's better to catch ourselves before the heat of the moment really spirals out of control, before we end up doing something that we later on regret, or before we end up saying something that we later on regret. It's always better to take an extra second to consider the consequences, and more than that, and to the topic of this video, to consider the possibility that whoever it is that we are upset about could really just be doing what they did out of ignorance. I think a good example of this, which happens to all of us, is on the road. When someone veers in front of us unexpectedly, or when someone does something stupid on the road, the natural instinct is to feel very provoked by that. It makes us want to basically do the same thing to the person. I had a guy recently who I veered in front of, who later on veered in front of me in a very aggressive way. And after I changed lanes, he followed me there too. And I couldn't help but feel bad for him, right? The amount of, how do I say, the amount of pain and hurt that he must have felt from me veering in front of him must have been so intense for him to feel the need to seek vengeance right away in the middle of the road. And this is something that we're all susceptible to, right? In one way or another. And I think the more we practice letting go of these emotions, the more we keep reminding ourselves to give other people the benefit of the doubt, the easier it gets over time.
Absolutely. Taking that extra second to pause can make all the difference. It's amazing how a brief moment of reflection can transform a potentially explosive situation into an opportunity for empathy. Road rage is a perfect example. It's such a common trigger for immediate, intense reactions. When we consider that someone else's aggressive driving might stem from their own stress, ignorance, or even just a bad day, it can diffuse our anger. Practicing this regularly, like building any habit, gradually rewires our initial reactions. It's like mental muscle memory. The more we do it, the more natural it becomes. It's also a way of protecting our own peace of mind. Reacting with anger often leaves us more upset, whereas approaching with understanding can leave us calmer and more in control.
I wanted to add a little bit more of a variation to that quote about first assuming ignorance or stupidity before assuming maliciousness. And that is actually from a guy named Douglas W. Hubbard. I'm not sure who that is exactly, but his variation is that never attribute malice or stupidity to that which can be explained by moderately rational individuals following incentives in a complex system. I think this is a little bit more precise, because when we take into consideration the system in which we're all working under, whether it's the rules of the road or the engineers who built these roads or the limitations of the cars that we're driving, at the end of the day, it always comes down to a systemic problem, right? The problem is always systemic. If there were better systems, if some people were flying, if there was better transportation, if there was less pollution through transportation, if all of these problems were addressed, we would not have so much road rage. We would not have so many cars on the road, especially here in LA. So at the end of the day, this just adds more credence to the idea that there are so many reasons why things are happening the way they are. And most of them, if not all of them, are coming from a place of inadequacy and insufficiency and stupidity more than it is from a place of maliciousness. What do you think about this?
That's an interesting addition, and it definitely adds another layer to the conversation. Douglas W. Hubbard's variation acknowledges the complexity of systems and incentives that shape behavior. It's a reminder that many actions are influenced by the broader context and structures within which people operate. When we consider systemic factors, it highlights how interconnected our actions are with the environment around us. It aligns with the idea that most problems are rooted in inadequacies and inefficiencies within the systems we navigate daily. Recognizing this can foster a more compassionate and problem-solving approach rather than one focused on assigning blame. Regarding your earlier question about strategies to pause and reconsider in the moment, I find that mindfulness practices like deep breathing or repeating a calming phrase can be effective. It creates a brief pause that allows for a more thoughtful response rather than a reactive one. Have you tried any specific techniques to help manage these moments of potential reactivity?
I think you nailed it on its head. Mindfulness training is really all it comes down to. Simply being mindful goes a long way in recognizing these reactive feelings that we have, and it stops those feelings in their tracks sometimes. Sometimes it's intense enough that it might be more difficult than other times, but it's always better to be mindful of what we are feeling and thinking before we end up doing something that we regret. I did have yet another layer that I wanted to add to this, and this was my own addition. Actually, before I get there, I wanted to add something else to what we've talked about already as far as the complex systems go, being the reason why so many things might not happen as we find ideal. And an example of this is the prison systems, right? The prisons, as we know it and see on TVs and documentaries and whatnot, are filled with all kinds of gangs that are usually divided along racial lines. And if you're a white person and you go into a prison system, you would have to be a saint to not join some type of gang who's going to offer you protection and to not display the same sort of behaviors that you might have been trying to avoid in the first place, simply out of self-preservation. And if you don't do that, you are now susceptible to the whims of all the other gangs who might want to take advantage of you. So that is just, I think, the most extreme, or one of the most extreme examples of how a system, the insufficiencies of a system, can really create an environment where individuals, regardless of their own intents and motives, end up doing things that they might not want to do otherwise. I want you to respond to that, add some new insights, don't just rephrase what I say, and then I'll add one last layer that I thought about myself, which I think is very interesting.
That's a powerful example. The prison system vividly illustrates how systemic flaws can force individuals into roles and behaviors that they might not choose under different circumstances. It's like a microcosm of how complex systems can override personal intentions, compelling people to act in ways dictated by their environment for survival. Adding to this, it's crucial to understand that these systems often perpetuate cycles of behavior. When individuals are released from prison, they carry the learned survival mechanisms with them, which can hinder reintegration into society. The stigma and lack of support they face outside further entrench these patterns. It's a stark reminder that addressing systemic issues requires not just reform within institutions, but also comprehensive support structures that help individuals transition and heal. Moreover, this example extends beyond prisons to many other societal structures. Education, healthcare, economic systems all can trap individuals in cycles of behavior driven by the need to navigate flawed systems. This understanding pushes us to advocate for systemic changes that address root causes rather than merely treating symptoms. Your insight encourages a broader perspective. While individual responsibility is important, we must also recognize and address the systemic factors that shape behavior. This dual approach can lead to more sustainable and compassionate solutions. Now I'm curious about your final layer. What's the additional insight you want to add?
Just to close off on that point that you were just making, I think this is why it's so important, especially in systems like the prison system, and even in our personal lives, to be more focused on restorative justice, so to speak, more than we are on retributive justice. Restorative justice means simply giving people the opportunity, basically using the least, how do I say? Basically using the least punishment necessary to influence a change in behavior towards the right direction. Basically finding ways that improves the behavior more than we do ways that punish the behavior, because punishment is not always going to influence people in the right direction. As we see with prisons, we have to be more intentional about what we are doing, and we can't simply let vengeance to be the motivation for how we treat people who wrong us. I think we need to be more focused on how to fix the behavior more than we are on making people feel the same hurt and pain, because that only perpetuates the problem in some ways. The extra layer that I wanted to add was in assuming hypocrisy before ignorance or malice, right? So basically, the Hanlon's razor suggests that we should first assume stupidity or ignorance before malice. And I'm thinking that actually it might be better to add hypocrisy before we get to the level of stupidity. When I say hypocrisy, I mean we should consider that we would most likely do the same thing that they are doing, whoever it is that's wronging us, if we were in their shoes. Not only in the moment, but also if we consider the fact that had we grown up in the lives that they did, had we grown up with the parents, the upbringing, the friends that they did, and in the environments that they grew up in, we would turn out very similar to them. And we could go even deeper than that and talk about genes and the lack of control that we have over the influences around us. Some people respond to things very differently through no choice of their own. Some people are more prone to depression, other people are more prone to confidence. And while we're always trying to balance out these deficits in ourselves when they're even noticeable at all, we should always recognize that we could very well be the person that we are upset about and use this to be more compassionate towards other individuals.
I love the concept of adding hypocrisy into the mix before jumping to conclusions about stupidity or malice. It really underscores the importance of empathy and humility in our judgments. If we consider that, given the same circumstances, upbringing, and genetic predispositions, we might act similarly. It fosters a deeper understanding and patience towards others. This approach not only aligns with restorative justice, but also with a broader sense of human interconnectedness. It's about recognizing that our actions are often a product of a complex interplay of factors beyond our immediate control. By assuming that we might have behaved similarly under the same conditions, we challenge ourselves to break the cycle of judgment and retribution, and instead focus on understanding and healing. In practice, this could transform personal relationships and societal systems alike. Imagine if our justice system, workplaces, and even everyday interactions operated on this principle. It would encourage a culture where people are given the benefit of the doubt and efforts are made to address underlying causes of behavior rather than simply punishing the symptoms. This perspective also dovetails nicely with the broader aim of fostering a more compassionate society. By constantly reminding ourselves of our potential for similar actions under different circumstances, we cultivate a mindset of continuous empathy and self-awareness. Your insight ties all these ideas together beautifully. It's not just about reducing reactivity, but about fundamentally reshaping how we view and respond to human behavior. This added layer of assuming hypocrisy could indeed be a powerful tool for promoting deeper understanding and more meaningful change.
I think it's always a good idea to look inwards before casting our judgments outwards. I think this is something that takes a lot of intentionality to do, because often our first reaction is to react to other people, to blame other people, to find wrongs in what they do without really recognizing our own contribution to that or our own susceptibility to the things that these people are under, whatever pressure that they're under. And I wanted to give one last example of that, that compassion that we might extend. If, say, a bear were to attack someone or a dog were to attack someone, the common reaction to that is not hate towards the bear. It's not retributive, although it could be. But I think more often than not, we understand that the animal was simply acting on its animal instincts. And if we recognize that human beings, while we might be the same species, are also different individuals made up of very similar processes, so to speak, as these other animals, we can extend that compassion to human beings, recognizing that the same way a snake bites and the same way a dog barks and the same way a monkey climbs trees based on its instincts, those are the same ways that other human beings are doing what they're doing based on their experiences and instincts, just as we might do the same things if we were in their position. If we were dogs, if we just happened to have been born as dogs, we would be barking just as dogs do. We would have no choice over the matter. We would not be able to decide that, well, I think barking is rude and I'm not going to do that, because it would be out of our control. So I think we need to allow people that same courtesy and respect those limits of control that other people and ourselves have.
That's a profound analogy. Recognizing that humans, like animals, often act based on their instincts, experiences, and environmental pressures can indeed foster a greater sense of compassion and understanding. When we see a dog bark or a bear attack, we don't hold them morally accountable in the same way we do humans, because we understand their behavior is driven by instinct and survival. Applying this mindset to human interactions invites us to acknowledge the limitations and influences that shape people's actions. It encourages us to look beyond the immediate behavior to the underlying causes. This doesn't absolve individuals of responsibility, but rather contextualizes their actions within a broader framework of human experience and instinct. It's true that extending this compassion requires a lot of intentionality. Our immediate reactions are often defensive or judgmental, driven by our own instincts for self-preservation. But by taking a moment to reflect, we can choose to respond with empathy instead. This shift can transform how we interact with others and how we understand our own behaviors. Your example underscores the importance of seeing others through a lens of shared humanity, recognizing that just as we are shaped by our environments and experiences, so are they. It's a call for humility and a reminder of our interconnectedness, urging us to approach others with the same understanding and kindness we hope to receive.
Would you mind briefly summarizing everything we talked about for the viewers, please, and myself?
Absolutely. Here's a summary of our conversation. We started by discussing Hanlon's razor, which suggests never attributing to malice that which can be explained by stupidity or ignorance. We expanded on this idea with Douglas W. Hubbard's variation, which adds that many actions can be explained by rational individuals following incentives in complex systems. We explored how systemic issues, like those in the prison system, can force individuals into behaviors they might otherwise avoid. This highlights the importance of restorative justice, focusing on rehabilitation and understanding rather than punishment and retribution. We also introduced the idea of assuming hypocrisy before ignorance or malice. This means considering that we might act similarly under the same circumstances, fostering empathy and compassion. Finally, we compared human behavior to animal instincts, emphasizing that, like animals, people often act based on their experiences and environment. This perspective encourages us to extend compassion and understanding towards others, recognizing the limits of control individuals have over their actions. Throughout, we emphasize the importance of mindfulness and intentionality in our responses, striving to understand and address underlying causes rather than reacting with judgment or anger. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.
Well said. Thank you.